Hello Linux lovers, my name's Wimpy. How you doing? Good morning. I've got a cup of tea. Oh, that's better. Right, okay. So, today I thought we'd take a look at the anatomy of the OBS Studio Snap for Linux. It's a snap that I maintain. Been maintaining it for a bit over a year now, I think. It's got a couple of interesting things about it. So if you're interested in streaming or OBS, then this will be insightful because it sort of explains how OBS is sort of put together. If you're interested in Linux, it'll give you some insight into sort of some of the new stuff that's in OBS for Linux specifically, if you care about things like Wayland and sort of accelerated capture off of an NVIDIA card. So I'm going to be going through how that whole thing is put together and the features and capabilities that it supports. So without further ado, I will just ping a couple of messages into a couple of places which today I remembered to pre-compose, so that was done nice and quickly. So right, let's bring up some bits and pieces here. What have we got? If you've popped into chat, do say good morning or hello, whatever time of day it is for you. It's always nice to get to know who's stopped by. Hey, Districo, is that how we're spelling that? I think so. Good morning. How are you? Thanks for stopping by. I've not seen you for a while, I don't think. Or are you a first-time visitor? It's getting to the point where I'm just starting to struggle to keep everybody's sort of, names in my head. Right then, so let's move over to the code view here. So one of the things I'll look at first of all is go and look and see if there's been any significant updates in the OBS GitHub. So this is something that I do periodically, just to sort of keep tabs on where the development is heading so that I can stay ahead of what changes I need to make in terms of the snap. Oh. Well, that was awkward. What's the... I thought it was just OBS Studio. Or OBS Project. There we go, that's why. So, let's have a look here. Let's have a look in the releases. Is there a new release candidate? Oh, there is. Okay, so we can actually update this. So we'll also have a look at what's new in the new version, and we'll update the snap. That's actually quite handy. I hadn't looked, but that's quite convenient. Morning. Oh gosh, Henrik, how you doing? Good to see you. And Brave Sir Jeff, formerly okay, it's still Jeff. Okay, hello Jeff, welcome. So Districo says they've been busy with work recently. Yes, but you're a Linux enthusiast. Okay, excellent, as am I. You've come to the right place. You got to know me through Jupiter Broadcasting. Oh, right, okay. Glad you listened to those. I've been meaning to get back into regularly participating in Linux Unplugged. I think soon that will be something I'll be able to do again, which I'm looking forward to. I really need this cup of tea this morning. I say cup of tea. I have, as is my wont, 2 cups of tea to start the day. So let's have a look. It says here, fixed a bug with the YouTube integration. Excuse me. So this is a new feature in OBS 27.1, which it more tightly integrates OBS with the YouTube creator dashboard for setting up and managing live streams. However, I built the 27.1 release candidate 1, which is what I'm using now, and that feature doesn't seem to be glued up with Linux at all. I couldn't find the new UI for that stuff, so I don't know if there is some kind of limitation as to why. But Linux tends to lag behind a little bit with things to do with browser integration features, which I'm almost certain that's going to be using. Okay. So these are just bug fixes. So this isn't a significant update. It's improvements over the existing release candidate. So let's just go to where the snap is maintained. Why did it not just take me? Oh, I'll just type it in. Google's having a bad day today. So Snapcrafters is sort of a community effort to maintain things, and here's the OBS Studio Snap. Okay. No one's reviewed this yet. Oh, that's hashtag awkward. So I've no longer got superpowers in any of these repositories, so I have to wait for people to review my changes. How long has this one been here? 6 days. Huh. And I can't push on top of that now I've submitted it. Anyway, okay, so this is the OBS Studio Snap. Snaps are quite straightforward if you're not familiar. Single YAML file pretty much defines everything. And I'll open this up in Visual Studio Code to go through it. We'll run down and explain what's in it and why it's there and what it does, those sorts of things, and how snaps can do things that you can't do, you know, with traditional packaging. You've obviously seen, well, if you're a return visitor here, you will have seen me fiddling around with Debian packaging in the past. So let's bring up Visual Studio Code. Wow, that's opened mega wide. New version of that, that's good. Let's pull you down here. Okay, so in development, Snapcrafters, OBS Studio. This is my branch. So I'm going to actually just create a branch from here. And call it this. There we go, and then I'll be able to stack that change on top of the same thing. So if we look at the YAML, almost everything is in the YAML. There is one other piece to the Snapcraft file, but let's just minimize the terminal down because we're mostly going to be in here. So those of you that are in chat, how many of you have looked at a snap before? And if not, this is diving in full on, because this is about, I think this snap uses every facility of Snapcraft, just about. So they're quite straightforward. There's metadata at the top. So what's the name of the thing? OBS Studio. Now this adopt info piece, you can specify up here things like description and summary and version numbers and things like that in metadata tags, or you can say adopt information from elsewhere. So this is saying adopt information from the OBS part, and we'll get to parts in just a moment. So this is actually saying all of that other metadata is over here. And this integrates with sort of Linux ecosystem metadata, and I'll explain how. The base simply says, well, what core, Ubuntu core, are we going to use? The current stable revision is core 20, so that's what I'm using. Grade stable means, is this fit for public consumption? Yes, it is. And confinement strict means that this is a strictly confined snap. It can't touch or manipulate anything on the host operating system unless you define those interfaces that it's allowed to access. And some of those the user has still got the option to override, and we'll go through what those are. License, broadly speaking, is GPL2, and I'm currently only building this for AMD 64. Obviously i386 is no longer a release architecture in Ubuntu, and frankly running OBS Studio on anything other than this at the moment is kind of tricky. There's a lot of work to support the M1 Max upstream. And then this is a recent feature, a relatively recent feature, to use LZO compression instead of XZ compression for the snap. So this will make the snap slightly bigger in size, but it also makes it considerably faster to start up and what have you. So then we've got some plugs. Plugs will feature a bit more here. This is basically hooking up desktop integration. It's as simple as that. So hooking into GTK3 themes, icon themes and sound themes. So that's all that's going on there. This is sort of boilerplate stuff. And in fact, some of that boilerplate can be removed if you use things called extensions, which I deliberately avoid because this snap is a bit of a snowflake, and I'll show you that later. So layouts are interesting. I mentioned earlier that this was strictly confined, which means it can't peek into the host operating system. But what you can do is some applications have like hard-coded lookup paths for things. So they want specifically to go and look in this location. And if it's in a snap, that technically doesn't exist because everything is rooted off /snap/name of snap/ so on, so on, so on. So what we do here is we map some of these hard-coded paths that are in the applications that we're packaging and tell them where their equivalent path is within the snap. So some of these are fairly obvious for finding plugins and snaps. Good morning, Takov, thanks for coming back. And Graham, morning. This one's an interesting one. There are some OBS plugins that want to use third-party libraries, and those third-party, and it will only look in, it's got like a limited search path to actually go and find where the libraries are. So I map this user local lib so I can put some third-party libraries inside the snap and then have the plugins that require those libraries find it. So this is then same. ALSA has at build time hard-coded paths that it looks in, so this maps those up. Similarly for getting Vulkan to work, this was required only for Intel and Radeon because the what's called the OpenGL plugin automatically accommodates for NVIDIA. There's another one here where AMD GPUs want to be able to reference this list of PCI IDs of graphics cards, so that and it's a hard-coded path, it wants to look there, so mapped that up. And the same here, just things that want to look at. So then we get to the apps, and these are the things, the executables, the entry points into the application. So OBS Studio is the main thing. The command is that. I use -- multi, which means you can start multiple instances of the OBS Studio snap. And that's because there's actually a bunch of process checking in OBS that says, am I already running? And in order to grant that capability in the snap, you have to have a bunch of quite invasive interfaces enabled to give it broad sort of process control. And in order to avoid that, I just start it with multi, which skips that code path, and it means we don't need to have a bunch of additional interfaces defined. And then these command chains are like shell scripts, and they are a way to inject things into the environment before the application runs. So this is just a standard desktop launcher which handles all the usual bits that a desktop app would need. And then there was a couple of bespoke extras here. Does the NVIDIA Shadowplay library included in the snap? The answer to that question is yes, Takov, but it's not called NVIDIA Shadowplay on Linux, and I'll show you that in just a moment. And here we have this common ID, which is the app stream ID for the application, and this is where we can then integrate with the ODRS user reviews and what have you. Then this is where the desktop icon resides, so it knows how to present that information with the icons on the desktop. And then we have some environment tweaking here. So these are environment variables that get put into the environment just before the application launches. So one is coercing the LD library path. I actually embed a newer version of Qt inside the snap than is available for Ubuntu 20.04, which is what Core 20 is based on. So I'll hang on a moment, that's interesting. So Takov, you say Flatpak implemented your solution for V4L loopback virtual webcam. I don't know it was my solution. I mean, I saw those changes coming and I did what I could in the snap to accommodate it. It's a little bit broken. I mean, it works once and then you have to reload the module for OBS to pick it up again. I'm a bit frustrated with that particular implementation. I don't think OBS should be trying to load kernel modules. That seems out of scope for a desktop application. Anyway, then we have some environment variables for Pipewire. So a new version of Pipewire is embedded in the snap, and that's so that screen capture on Wayland enabled devices can work. This makes it possible to run Python scripts, so you can have user scripts. And then again, this is to accommodate the fact that I'm bundling a newer version of Qt inside the snap. This is just pretend you didn't see that bit. I'm doing something cheeky with the way I'm building this snap, and that's just to accommodate it. And then again, this is part of the Pipewire to satisfy where the plugins work. And then we get these plugs or interfaces. So this is basically all of the permissions the snap needs in order to function. Some of these are automatically connected and some are at the user's discretion. So obviously things like audio playback and audio record, you know, it's OBS. And so that audio record, because this potentially gives access to sensitive information on the device, that's not auto connected. But we did apply for what's called an override, and in the Snap Store, audio record is automatically connected for OBS, the OBS Studio Snap, because it's reasonable that people would expect that behavior for OBS. Morning, Paul. How you doing? So then we've got Avahi Control, and that's so that Ndi works, because Ndi uses Avahi to do network discovery. Browser support is a bunch of additional system level access in order for browsers to operate. So OBS has essentially a it's Chromium embedded framework inside it. Camera, of course. Stuff for the desktop, access to your home directory, so you can access, record locally. Jack audio, joystick, which is a curious one. I won't get into that now. This is the kernel module observe, and this is what makes it possible for the OBS Snap to see whether the V4L loopback plugin is actually loaded or not. So the original code in OBS for the webcam module on Linux said, is this module loaded? If it is, fine, move on. And if it wasn't, it would attempt to load it. So I've not added the extra permissions to actually manage kernel modules in the OBS Snap. I may have to do that at some point because the code appears to be deviating from the original scope. Network is this application needs to be a network client, and then network bind means this application wants to bind to sockets to be a network server. And in the case of OBS, this snap has the obs-websocket plugin integrated, which enables you to remotely control OBS, and so that's why the network bind is required. The OpenGL interface is somewhat of a misnomer. It should probably just be called GPU these days. But that's basically all things accelerated graphics. So it is OpenGL, it's CUDA, it's video acceleration, it's a whole bunch of stuff. Password manager service, so you may be familiar with things like K-Wallet in Kubuntu or the GNOME keyring manager. this is the interface that allows an application to store credentials in those places, and this is required by the integrated browser in OBS if you sign in to something and it needs to, maintain those credentials. Process control, that's not automatically connected, but that's there to if you want like the deep stats in the stats box, you need process control to see that. Pulse is obvious. Raw USB, that's probably going to go away. This was to try and facilitate the Gphoto plugin, which simply isn't working, and I don't have the hardware to test it, so I may remove that plugin. Removable media is to get to USB storage devices and things like that if you want to save stuff there. Screen inhibit control, that means that OBS can override your screensaver from kicking in. Screencast legacy, that's there to help facilitate the capture on Wayland and EGL capture. System observe again is the ability to look at certain process information. Unity 7 is to access some dbus interfaces that were specific to the Unity 7 desktop, but are actually quite widely used now. So things like the indicator dbus services and stuff like that. UPower observe is the ability to look at the power status. Wayland is obviously to access the Wayland display server or socket, and the same for X11. So that's like, it's fairly broad access, but nevertheless it is still confined. And most of those you can choose not to do. And then I pack a bunch of additional sort of helper things in here. So all of these are EGL info, GLX info, and let's just go down the list a little bit. VA info, VDPAU, Vulkan info. These are tools bundled inside the snap that you can run from inside the snap, and they're ways to help determine that you've actually got the hardware acceleration working. I'll demonstrate that in just a moment. And then Ffmpeg is bundled inside the OBS Studio snap, and it's built in such a way that it enables all of the accelerated pipelines for video encoding, both on NVIDIA GPUs and also via the VA API. And VA API is how you access accelerated video decoding and encoding on Intel and AMD GPUs. So if you install the OBS Studio Snap, you do actually have a full-featured accelerated Ffmpeg inside it that you can access discreetly just by running obs-studio.ffmpeg, and you have a full-featured Ffmpeg. And then ffplay and ffprobe, because I had to build those anyway, so why not expose them? It means that, for the price of installing one thing, you get a bunch of extra stuff. And then SRT, oh gosh, this is secure real, I forget, it's a streaming protocol though, and this is built into the Ffmpeg snap, and I expose all of these commands as well, so you can push streams around over the SRT protocol from within inside the snap, which Alan Pope and we were using this when we were doing 8-bit verses, and we were actually running things from each other's home but ingesting it in one place. So that's a bunch of extra commands. This is a nice little trick I'm doing. So what I've done here is I've declared that there is a package repository, which is a PPA basically, which has got this new version of Qt inside it. So why am I doing this? If you track the upstream OBS Git, you can see there's a move to more modern versions of Qt, and eventually it looks like Qt 6 is being brought up. But what I've done is seen that there's some of the features require newer versions of Qt. Qt 5.12 is what's available in the Ubuntu 2004 archive. but Qt 5.15 is what some of the developers have been targeting. So I've done this, so we've got a current version of Qt 5 inside the snap as part of the runtime. So now we get on to parts, and these are actually like the source code or the packages from the Ubuntu archive that are used to compose the snap. Now this first one, this is a little bit of a hack. This is an unorthodox approach. But when you're running a desktop app inside a snap, you need what's called a desktop helper to accommodate for the fact that the snap is running in a confined place and some of the paths need to be coerced as to where it accesses configuration data and stuff like that. And Snapcraft has a bunch of extensions to make this easy for you. But because I'm doing things like this, which I need to do, I can't use the extension straight up, so I'm cheating a bit. So what I'm doing is I'm saying actually use the desktop helper in the extensions for KDE Neon. And the reason I'm doing that is that OBS is a Qt snap, so it shares a lot in common with a KDE application. And then I build this extension and then provide its runtime requirements. So I'm using the extension just for the helper script, but not for all of the other facilities that the helper provides. So Takov, this is where we get into sort of, the stuff that you were interested in. This is the first part of it. So this is the Ndi codec headers. These get pulled in and installed inside the build environment for the snap. And what happens is when those are present, when Ffmpeg is compiled, it enables you to turn on the NVenc encoder in the Ffmpeg build. So this is the first part of how you get accelerated in video encoding. But Takov specifically asked about Shadowplay. And technically on Windows, Shadowplay is two things. It's the NVenc video encoder and frame buffer capture, and we'll get to that in a bit later. SRT, I completely forget what this stands for. It's a bit annoying. I'm going to have to go and look. But it's a secure, fast, low latency streaming protocol. So let's just go and look. Secure, reliable transport. There we go. And this I'm using so that I can access and ingest SRT streams. Good morning, Vince. How you doing? So this will look quite familiar. What we do here is we say, well, this bit of software is uses Cmake. So we tell it use the Snapcraft plugin Cmake. We then tell it where to get the source tag to use, so we don't always build from the tip of Git. And then we provide any parameters to Cmake, and then we just say what the build packages are. So any build packages are effectively apt installed from the Ubuntu archive at build time inside the snap build environment. And then the prime step here, priming is like the very last part in the Snapcraft build life cycle, where all of the bits are aggregated to make the final snap. And what this says is when it does the prime step, when it pulls everything together, remove the minus in front here says remove the user include directory, because we don't need the headers to actually run the application. We only need the headers to build the application. And it also removes the pkg config stuff. Again, that's a build requirement, not a runtime requirement. So this pattern is going to get repeated. We build the current stable x264 inside the snap, so there's always the latest stuff built inside it.
Follow Pastor90.
Thanks very much for the follow and welcome to the stream. Thank you for stopping by. So this uses the Auto Tools plugin, but the process is similar. Where'd you get the source, the branch, what configure parameters get passed into the build environment. These are the build packages, and then again it's the same kind of thing. This time it's a little different. It specifically says prime just user lib and then drop that directory. And the reason I do this is I try to, because OBS is big and this is a particularly large snap because it's got loads of extra stuff in it, I try to stage just what's required for the runtime. Yeah, so, you know, if you've never seen a Snapcraft YAML before, you know, you get some idea as to, like, this is a bit easier. AOM is the AV1 decoder. No, is it the decoder or encoder? So this is built, the current version inside the snap. It's the same pattern, uses Cmake. Those are the things. These are what we exclude. So we don't need the headers, we don't need the static library, we don't need package config. David is the decoder, and again, this one uses Mason though. So the same process, exactly the same idea, but this time we have some parameters for Mason, what we keep. And then here we go, now we get into Ffmpeg. Now, OBS Studio is currently, I've said StreamFX here, but I've noticed problems with OBS itself as well, is technically, there's bugs if you build it with Ffmpeg 4.4. So this is quite a nice feature of snaps, because here we're building in the latest versions of the AV1 encoder and decoder and the latest, absolute latest versions of X264. But here, we're actually holding back the version of Ffmpeg to 4.3 because we need that older version. So this is where snaps work well. The OBS Studio is a really great example of why snaps are so flexible, because you can choose exactly what goes inside the snap. So this has got a new keyword here which says after. So this basically says don't build the Ffmpeg part until all of these ones have been built. So these source parts here were all required to unlock additional capabilities in Ffmpeg. And although this is a much longer list of build packages, the process is the same. You know, you tell it what plugin to use, where to get the code, and what it requires to build. And then we've got a new one here, which is stage packages, which works just like build packages, except stage packages are packages that get apt installed inside the runnable snap. So these are basically all the runtime requirements for Ffmpeg. So Graham says, I wonder if this approach of defining a snap is defined by Ansible. Yeah, there is a snapcraft extension for Ansible I seem to remember seeing some time ago. I think that was more to do with installing them rather than building them. And Paul says, I love snaps. It's just because of snaps that I can use foobar on Linux, even though it's a Windows app. Yeah, we did some fun things like Notepad++ was introduced, which is a hugely popular snap. It's among the top snaps in the Snap Store. And that's because it's the text editor that people know. You know, if they're coming from Windows and they see Notepad++, they install it because they go, oh yeah, that's what I use. Oh, that's what I know. So we have a feature, there is a feature in Ubuntu where when the first run wizard appears in proper Ubuntu, it suggests a bunch of apps, and that's a curated list, and that's what Alan and I used to, you know, maintain. And we put Notepad++ in there, and it was, you know, wildly successful. So these are all the runtime requirements, and this is all of the build configuration, and at the end of it, you get Ffmpeg out the end. And then similarly, here's Pipewire being built, and again, Pipewire, current version of Pipewire, latest version of Pipewire, built inside the snap. And this is so that the Wayland code paths of OBS Studio have what they need to then talk to the host in order to do Wayland screen capture. So this is required because older versions of various Linux distributions don't have the required version of Pipewire available. So we build it, but then turn off just about everything, because the only thing we need to work here is screen capture pass through to XDG desktop. Again, build and stage packages, what we keep and throw away. This one's a bit more interesting. This is Ceph. This is Chromium Embedded Frameworks. This is, if you've heard of Electron, Electron is like the big brother to Ceph. Ceph is a browser, the browser, Chromium browser engine, if you like, rendering engine. So JavaScript, the media engine, and the web rendering engine. The lead developer of Ceph works at Spotify, so unsurprisingly, all of the Ceph builds are here, and that's why the Spotify desktop client uses Ceph. So we pull in a pre-built tarball, and this is not the most current version of Ceph. And again, this is another example of why snaps are flexible, but this is specifically, this version is the version that's supported by OBS on Linux. So it's very specifically created. So this pulls in a large tarball. We then define some build packages, and then we actually override the pull behavior here. So the pull stage is go and check out the source code or download the tarball or whatever. So all we do here is by saying snapcraft control pull, that means do whatever you would normally do. And then on the end here, I then strip some symbols out of these three binaries, which shrinks them hugely. They're like hundreds of megabytes together ordinarily. When you strip them, they're tens of megabytes. So this helps keep the size of the snap down. So, but oh goodness, Blantana Metens, goodness, that is some username you've got there. Does this pipe available for public? I'm not sure what you mean. Can you re-ask your question? I'll definitely answer it. So Jeff says, will you ever live stream creating a snap from scratch? Sure, if you want me to, I can do that. My earbuds are about to run out, so I'm just going to get the other pair. That'll take a moment to sync up, I think. Okay. There we go. So, and then we've got overriding the build step. This is a peculiar bit of code, and this is basically run a bunch of shell commands in order to do the build of Ceph. And it isn't actually a build, it just compiles the wrapper. So yeah, I could do a snap from scratch. What do you have in mind? Anything in particular? And then what we do here in the prime step is we remove the Ceph directory from the root of the snap. And that's because because this includes all of the build environment, and once we've built it and linked against it, we've just got the basic engine in the right place. So RN noise, this is a machine learning noise, background noise remover. I use the RN noise OBS plugin on all of my microphone inputs. So last night when I was streaming, I had a great big fan next to me blowing at me because it was really warm, and you would not have heard that. It's really very good. So if you've used anything like NVIDIA Broadcast, it's a similar, outcome, but it built into OBS. This is where I drag in the OBS, the Qt, the new version of Qt. So this gets these packages out of that PPA. the bass, the SVG and the Wayland pieces. And then when we prime the snap, we basically remove everything we don't need. All it leaves behind really is the shared objects for the Qt runtime. So let's have a look here. I can't remember the last time I did a snapcraft YAML from scratch. Have I done one from scratch on stream? I can't remember. Well, NeoVim. Yeah, doing text editors is not great. I don't think text editors are a good candidate for snaps because they have to be classic, which means they're not confined. So at that point, the only benefits at that point are that you can rev the snap quickly. But yeah, some smart versions should snap up the music player Guaya deck. Gosh, the only Linux player I really like. Okay, well, I could look at that. Are you sure it's not already been done? Go and check in the Snap store. Just make sure it doesn't already exist. And Vince says, would OBS be one of the more complex snaps to build with all those lovely plugins? Yes, I think this and the Nextcloud snap are probably the two most complex snaps that I'm aware of, that I can talk about. I know of one other that is being used by another organisation, which I can't speak about.
Zimbabwe.
Hello, Wario. Welcome to the stream. But yeah, this is a pretty complex snap because it's got so much stuff in it, and it's also leveraging a whole bunch of acceleration, GPU acceleration features and what have you. So there's Qt, and now we get on to building OBS itself. And so it's another Cmake project, and again it says only build this after we've got Ceph and Ffmpeg and Pipewire and Qt and RN Noise and X264. And of course Ffmpeg said only build me after I've done all this other stuff. So this is where things get a bit crazy. So these are Cmake plugins. There's nothing complicated here. These are just documented Cmake parameters in OBS. And in fact, I've seen that there's an initiative underway in the OBS project to entirely refactor the Cmake for OBS, the browser, and the VST plugins. And that's good, but that's going to require a bunch of significant refactoring in here when that lands. So this, says where to get the code, and it says RC1. Now we know that RC2 is out now, so we'll just make that change and save that. And at the top of the script, you'll remember I said about adopt info. This is where the metadata comes from. So adopt info from the OBS part is what it said at the top of the screen. This is the OBS part, and this is the app data that's provided by the upstream project. And this pass info basically says ingest that XML and pull out things like the name, the description, the summary information, screenshots, version numbers, a whole bunch of stuff. So without having to provide all of that metadata a second time, I can just use what is in the upstream project. Now, this is where we get into the peculiarities of OBS itself. If I just wanted to build OBS at this point, I wouldn't need all of this override pull stuff. And this set version is also where we get the version number that gets put into the snap version. So it takes the current tag from Git. And then there's a couple of little... So these are a couple of things. So this is just coercing the icon name to be relative to where the icon is installed inside the snap. So that's just a little bit of coercion to display the correct icon. These are a couple of patches which are in upstream Git which haven't made it to master yet, which are Linux specific fixes. So I just pull down the diff from the pull requests from the upstream projects and then apply those patches. So this is patching the source code that we've just checked out. And then we change directory into where the source code exists during the build stage. Now, this is another workaround. Upstream refused to believe that this is necessary, but it absolutely is. And I've raised a pull request, which they're refusing to merge. But sooner or later, they're going to realize that they actually need it. And in fact, there's a bunch of people on other distros using modern versions of Cmake who've basically said, yes, this fixes the problem. I have submitted a patch upstream. One day they'll merge it, I'm sure. Now, OBS plugins can either be built, well, it's the choice of the plugin developer. They can either be built what's called in tree, or they can be built out of tree. Most OBS plugins are built in tree, which means you check the source code for the plugin out inside the source tree of OBS and then add that plugin name to the list of plugins to build, and you compile OBS and then that plugin gets built as well. So what we do here is there's a whole bunch of plugins which are in tree. So now what I do is I go and clone a whole bunch of OBS plugins inside the source tree that we've checked out for OBS. So this is the watch media. Oh, you shouldn't be surprised to see, yeah, not surprised to see Exeldro's name. I think almost all of his plugins are included inside this snap. So here we go, checking out some code and then adding the plugin name to the Cmake list file so that it gets built. Yeah, he's the most prolific plugin author on OBS, and I see a lot of his work in upstream OBS as well, where he's obviously fixing bugs that he's encountered through creating his plugins that he fixes, or adds capability in OBS itself to better facilitate a plugin that he's working on. So yeah, he's amazing. Are you a Linux user, Dust? So there's a whole bunch of them, all just pulling the code inside the thing. Hello, Esme. How are you? Right then, and then we've got an override build step. This was just some monkeying around to make the caption headers visible so that it built properly. And then at the end, we move a few of the Cmake files into what's called the stage area of the snap. The stage is something that all parts can see at build time. And I do this so that some of the other plugins that build out of tree can see the project Cmake configuration to build. So then we've got some build environment variables. These are environment variables we stand up just whilst we're compiling. So these are just some coercions for library locations and what have you. Mostly for the fact that, you know, I've got a custom build of Qt in an odd location. So that's mostly what that's all about. Just as before, the build packages, but excluding anything to do with Ffmpeg and Qt5, because we've built those from source inside the snap already, so we don't need to pull in any of those things from the Ubuntu archive. So Dust says, nope, you're Mac OS, but had a few run-ins with Exeldro. Okay. Oh, you're going to look to get him on a project. That's interesting, because I am as well. So Exeldro's got this, I think it's called like the Audio Mixer plugin or something like that. and he started working on the Linux implementation, but then he was doing it sort of blind because he didn't have a Linux development environment set up. So it sort of went so far, but it didn't get concluded. And he has written in the project that he would like to fully implement the Linux pieces as well. And I'm seriously considering funding Exceldro to complete the Linux implementation on the audio mixer, because I've got to the point where there's only so much I can do with OBS itself and the way the audio channels are, you know, monitored and mixed, and Pulse Audio, you know, which is the Linux sound server currently. I've just hit the limits of what I need to be able to do, and I think his project can fill those gaps. So I'm seriously considering asking him how much it would cost to fund that work, to bring that project to completion on Linux. What project are you? Is it a project you can speak about? What is it you want him to work on? Glad you're doing well. Oh, you're prepping for final exams. I hope that's going well for you, Esme. You're not too stressed out, I hope. Yes, I'm very well. Had a fantastic weekend. Good race night last night, so feeling relaxed. And I've got some new gubbins to play with a bit later today as well. So yeah, all things good here. I'm running out of tea though. That's a bit disappointing. So these are the same bits. You work with a streamer that goes a bit ham with... do you work with Nutty by any chance, Dust? You're bound to say yes. It's got to be who it is. So a lot of what I've done here is inspired by... I mean, it's not as flash as Nutty's streams, but I am working on, because we don't have all the integrations on Linux. Nope with him, the beta tester for my product yesterday. What's your product, Dust? Come on, stop being vague. I want to know the details. So one of the reasons why I make this sort of fully loaded OBS snap for Linux users is to make it easy for Linux users to access, you know, stuff like this, for example. Look. Doing all of the transitions and what have you, like with move transition and all of that stuff that you'll be familiar with, and you know, doing the whole snizzle, right? This wasn't possible a year ago, or a bit over a year ago, which is why I work on this, to try and bring all of that convenience to Linux users. And the next step is to work on or create equivalents to things like the Aurum board for Linux, so we can do more interesting like bit integrations and stuff like that. Mr. Greggles, yes, I have heard. Yes. Oh wow, he's got some really amazing stuff. I've seen he does that like bullet time camera rotation stuff, right? That's Mr. Greggles, yeah. Well, amazing. So what do you do for Mr. Greggles? If anyone's not seen Mr. Greggles' stuff, it's absolutely fantastic. I used to play the drums, not so much these days. Yeah, I bet you did. There's like 30... How many cameras are in that setup? Anyway, right. Those are stage packages. So that's OBS itself. This here is staging just what's required inside the snap to be able to inquire about kernel modules, to check whether the virtual camera stuff is loaded. 56. Wow. Yeah, it's amazing. It looks incredible as well. If nobody's ever seen, go and find some Mr. Greggles videos. Then we build libcurl from source and stick it specifically... No, actually, that's a lie. We stage libcurl, and then we use this organize step to say, take this file in this location and deposit it here inside the snap. And that's because, here we go, Advanced Scene Switcher has hard-coded lookup paths for libcurl 4.so. So even though libcurl is in the snap already, the advanced scene switcher could never find it. So this is a little hack to put it somewhere where it can be discovered by the plugin. Here's the NDI stuff. So that's a tarball, well, it's a runnable install thing. So we unpack it and deposit things again in user local lib because the plugin for NDI expects to find it there. There's an OBS plugin called Input Overlay, which I did used to build into this snap, but that older version, it introduced significant performance problems. So what we've done is removed the Input Overlay plugin from the snap, but built into the snap all of its runtime requirements, because you can download OBS plugins and put them in your home directory, and this snap will use them. So you can still supplement this snap with other plugins if they've been built for Linux. So all of these things are all to make Input Overlay work. Now there is a new version of the Input Overlay plugin, and I should probably test and evaluate that again to see if those performance issues are sorted out. So these are just runtime requirements for a third-party plugin. The VLC plugins, this is basically a bunch of the VLC runtime, and that's so that you can use the VLC media sources from OBS Studio. That's what that does. Let's just get back to what Dust was saying. But basically the software is originally to fix his issues. Okay, interesting. Okay, so you're working up a solution for other people that want to do exotic camera configurations. Yeah, my setup here is pretty simple. I've got 2 cameras, and at home I've got 4 cameras and 3 NDI sources that I ping around. So, you know, probably more than most, but, you know, quite manageable for one person. I made my own NDI encoder actually for that. So something like the what is it? The bird? I can't remember. Little bird, blue bird, or whatever. It's basically an NDI encoder in a box. Does three NDI, 3 HDMI inputs. Right then. So now we get into here a bunch of OBS plugins which have to be built out of tree. So each of these are built as a separate part. They say it has to be built after OBS, and the process is exactly the same. These out of tree ones, sometimes they work with a standard Cmake build. Other times you have to do something like this to build it manually. So there's a whole bunch of these. You can see here this one works. I'm just doing a little patch here because this says it needs Cmake 3.17, but it doesn't, so I just drop the version down to Cmake 3.16, which is what's available by default. This Gphoto plugin, I don't have the hardware to test it. Apparently it doesn't work. And because I can't get to the bottom of it, I may drop it, but somebody did show interest in helping with it recently, so hopefully we'll get that going. This is a GStreamer plugin, which means that anything you can do with GStreamer, you can now create your own GStreamer pipelines as your own custom plugins, which is a very powerful feature. That's great. This is the NDI plugin itself, which uses the NDI library, and I use this for getting cameras from the other side of the room in. And then Takov, if you're still here, this is the final piece of, does this OBS Snap support Shadowplay? So I'm not a Windows user, but what I understand of Shadowplay is it's an NVIDIA technology to do video recording whilst you're playing games. And it uses 2 things. It uses NVIDIA NVENC to do the video encoding, so it offloads the video encoding onto discrete chips on the GPU. But it also uses frame buffer capture, and that's what this plugin is for here. So what this plugin allows you to do is, instead of capturing a screen through X or Wayland, you can actually capture the frames directly off the GPU buffer. So there's no passing it through the display server. Now, this comes with a bit of a caveat. I will show you. FBC on Linux is only available on Quadro and Quadro cards, and the other one, Titan cards. However, there is, I think it's this project. Does this look like the right one? Yes. There is this project here called NVIDIA Patch. And what this does is patch NVENC and NVFBC drivers to unlock all of the NVENC encode pipelines, because it's restricted to, I think, 2 or 3 on consumer cards, but it can do up to 16, I think. So it unlocks all of the encode pipelines on NVENC, and then the NVFBC stuff unlocks the frame buffer capture on consumer cards as well. So I use these. I've got, in this machine, I've got a 3080 Ti, I've got the 3090 at home, and I've also used these on the 2080 Ti, and they're terrific. And this was considerably important in doing what we were doing last night. That game streaming we did last night, where there's the 4 of us doing real-time multiplayer racing, is only possible because of this. Without this, the overhead of doing all of that capturing is just too much. The actual full display capture on Linux in OBS is a massive performance bottleneck. And this, if you've got an NVIDIA card, this is just essential. And this is why it's things like NVENC and this, which is why I continue to use NVIDIA GPUs on Linux, because of the live streaming stuff. I can't access the same kind of performance on AMD yet, but I am investigating that. I've now got the 6900 AMD card, and the video encoding performance looks decent and quality's up now. So hopefully, Takov, that's answered your question about Shadowplay in OBS. It's quite a big thing. Yeah, so Dust, yeah, somebody's patched it out. Yeah, if you've not seen that, you want this in your life. If you've got NVIDIA, if you've got a 16, 20 or 30 series card, you want these patches, man. They're outstanding. And they're always kept up to date. Whenever there's been a new, I'm obviously only using Linux, but whenever there's a new driver, I go here and it's always been updated to support the new version. So there we go. That is your Shadowplay equivalent. That plus NVENC is the lowest processing overhead for high quality encoding. Similarly, there is this VK capture, and this works in a similar way, except it captures off the Vulkan renderer directly, so it doesn't do screen capturing. So this is good because if you've got an AMD or upcoming Intel GPU and your game is Vulkan, then you can actually capture at decent performance the whole screen much more effectively than you can when you're actually capturing a display under Linux. So these two things are a way to really accelerate screen capture on Linux in a way that isn't possible with the standard, is it Xshim? I think it is. So does AMD have a similar counterpart? I've just answered that question. This is it. The closest that I've found is this. So yeah, this is a specific specific plugin that will appear in the list of plugins to say capture Vulkan, but it only works for Vulkan. Which is fine because most Proton game, most things running under Proton are using Vulkan now. There we go. So RGB Levels, another plugin just for manipulating colors. Spectralizer, that's the thing that does, for example, can you see there's a very slight audio wave. It's quite a quiet piece of music at the moment, but that's done. That's the audio spectralizer massively configured doing that there. It's quite a nice plugin, can do some nice subtle effects with that. Text Pango, this is an essential one for Linux. So by default OBS comes with TTF, True Type Top font support for putting text in places, but it's quite limited in how it works, whereas this uses Pango, which is another font rendering library available on Linux. And the advantage of this is you get, in my opinion, it's a higher quality renderer. You can flip and rotate text in different orientations, and it supports Unicode. So for me, it means I can put emoji in my text, which is obviously, an essential feature. So this is just another font rendering thing, and I always use this over the TTF equivalent. It's got more features, so that's nice. VNC, if you want to embed VNC sources, this plugin will do that for you. The WebSocket, this is essential. So I haven't actually hooked up this Stream Deck here yet. The one at home is fully enabled. But this enables you to use a WebSocket client. So there's an app for Android called Stream Control, which is a great remote control for OBS. And that will talk to this, so you can switch scenes just by tapping icons on a tablet. Or what I've been doing is I've got a build of a Stream Deck UI for Linux, and I've built another snap called OBS Cli, which is a client WebSocket, a client for this WebSocket. And then I have a bunch of shell scripts which do different transitions and things. And I have those mapped to buttons on my Stream Deck, so I can manipulate OBS from buttons on the Stream Deck in much the same way that Stream Deck users on Mac and Windows can. So this is like an essential plugin. And yeah, Dusted, or Dust, sorry. Version 5. I've deliberately held back from embedding that yet, and I'll probably hold off going to version 5 until I know how all of the clients have been updated to support that newer version of the protocol. So I'm just going to hold fire on that a little bit. And Dust says, how's your experience with Stream Deck on Linux? It was very poor, but possible. And these days, it's actually quite decent. So let's just bring up this and go to this project. Now, the Stream Deck on... oh gosh, there's so many of them now. Oh, not Stream UI, Stream Deck UI. Okay. This is the one. So this is the project I use, Stream Deck UI, and the guy that wrote this did a really good job, but they don't keep up to date with like the pull requests very often. So the tip of Git for this at the moment is actually quite good, but I've maintained a fork of this in the past, and I'm going to rebase that fork because there's a bunch of cool stuff in these pull requests here. Not least this one here, exporting rendered icons, supporting Gifs, support for SVG files, 99 pages instead of 10, and there we go. So, but the current version now you can drag and drop. I mean, this is it. It's configure. I'll just drag it down. I haven't configured my Stream Deck, but this is the app. And it used to be that you had to fiddle around, you had to constantly navigate places, but now if I can find something, let's just do, well, this is a ridiculous example, but let's do this. I can just drag an image onto the thing. Now that seems like an obvious thing to have, but that wasn't there for ages. And the fact you can just drag images on and then also remove them nice and easily, it means configuring a Stream Deck on Linux is like super easy now. And then the way that I actually use this is I bind the buttons to shell scripts. So my OBS Chrome script basically opens up a clean Chrome browser and opens up Twitch, YouTube, Stream Elements, Twitter, Video, Ninja, and what have you, so that I've got everything open that I need. And then these are scripts that are like my big macros for starting and ending, and those in turn just call a whole bunch of stuff in OBS CLI to set particular start transitions, set the volumes of various audio sources, so each time I start a stream it goes through the same sort of macro. So it's not like got the nice drag and drop of like Twitter integration and stuff like that you see on Windows, but now it's possible to create as complex integrations, which is why I want to look at doing bots for bits and stuff like that, because now it should be possible to do some of the fun stuff where I can have events mapped up here and stuff. So yeah, that's the current state of things. It's much improved, much better than it was a year ago. Much better. Thank you very much, Vashish. Is that how we pronounce that? Thanks very much, and thanks for stopping by. Right then, so let's just finish our run through. So yeah, the WebSocket plugin, that's just great. And then finally, we've got this OBS Wrapper, and that says do this after we've done all of these plugins. And this says stage all of those things. So I mentioned at the top, I've embedded a bunch of things to do, you know, graphic stack debugging from inside the snap. This is what stages those, but then this is also embedding this. And here we go. So this is just a little bit of coercion to make sure that Alter, which is one of the sound daemons on Linux, to work. And then this is a bunch of environment variable coercion to make sure that Vulkan works inside the snap as well. So these are just some additional bits. And then finally, I noticed that sometimes the plugin directory doesn't get created properly. And then here we detect what display server we're running on, whether it's Wayland or not. And if it's Wayland, we coerce Qt to use the Wayland backend as opposed to the X11 backend. And then this was a tiny issue I found where the session manager was causing a problem, so we just unset that and then execute the OBS Studio binary that's inside the snap. So this is just a bunch of specific setup in this case, when in fact these two cases, this is specific to the fact that OBS is running inside a snap and it needs to know how to find certain things that are in different paths than it would ordinarily expect. And then this is to accommodate Wayland. Environment coercions. Oh yeah, and then this line here is only do these things when you're running OBS. So for example, I have the snap installed and I'm obviously using it to do this stream right now. So line 27, what's this? Hang on a moment. Let's just go and look at what Graham is pointing out. So line 27. this line here, I think. Oh, I've the use of single double brackets using both. Is that intended? I'm line 27. We're on the same line here, yeah? Is that the line you're referring to, or this one? This is a does the string contain? That's what 22 is. So that's saying in my parameters to execute the thing, does this string appear within it? So that's what that's doing. This is deliberate. Yes, this is to do specifically bash string comparisons. This is not POSIX compliant. This is a bashism to do a very specific string comparison in line 27 here. Yes, that double equals is exactly specific. This is a bash thing. And again, this is saying that does and it's saying and the environment Wayland display server includes the word Wayland in it somewhere. Okay. Yeah, it, like I say, it's quirky. Bash is quirky. So that explains what that is. So then we then have a cleanup step, and this says after everything, do this, and this overrides the prime step. And what I'm doing here is basically iterating over a bunch of directories that I know we don't need and removing them from the snap, and then going and removing other things from the snap. Now all of these, with the exception of these icons, which actually take up quite a lot of space, all these other things don't take up much room, but they are lots and lots of small files, and lots of small files inside a snap can hamper the startup performance just as much as few large files. So I try and strip out as much of the small files that we really don't need in order to help with the startup performance. And that's why, considering its complexity and how much stuff is inside this snap, its startup performance is actually pretty decent. So that's the snap, the YAML. Now I could kick off a build here. Let's do that because we have just revved the version number. So let's do two things. Let's get this terminal aligned here. We'll split this and we'll go to where this development there. So the first thing I'm going to do is, because I've revved the version of snapcraft and it's been a while since I've built it, I'm going to clean the VM that it builds inside. So snaps build inside virtual machines to make sure that they run in an untainted environment. And then I'm going to run snapcraft --debug. Now the reason I do the debug is if the build fails anywhere through, you'll get left inside the VM where the snap is being built, and you can actually try and fix the problem, and iterate on building it and resume the build. So we'll just kick off a build. I also export some environment variables in my profile. Well, actually in a thing called dirm, which says use 16 cores for this VM, use 16 gigs of RAM and allocate 64 gigs of space. And that's because I've got a decent machine and I want more of my system resources exposed to this VM that's building a large application. And that's because by default it will only expose one core. to the build environments. The builds can take a really long time, and this is a significant snap, so it does take a bit of a time to build. So what we can also do is, whilst it's building, we've got the OBS Studio snap, and then I mentioned, you know, Ffmpeg is built inside it. So, you know, you can actually access the Ffmpeg from within the snap and run it just like you would Ffmpeg installed in any other way. So installing the OBS Studio snap also gives you a fully loaded Ffmpeg with all of the acceleration stuff enabled as well. And then, you know, you can run these tools to run these tools. I'm on NVIDIA, so that's a terrible example. What would be a better example on NVIDIA? There we go. Run all of these tools to interrogate the state of the various, you know, drivers and hardware in the device and what have you. So this is quite handy because sometimes there are bugs, and I can have people run glx info on the host and then have them run glx info from inside the snap and send me both of those, and then I can try and figure out like what I've busted or haven't accounted for. So Vince says, not sure I understand the single and double brackets myself. It works when it works for me. Trial and error. So the double braces is a bash syntax to say I'm doing a string comparison here. So that, you know, is how you access it. Now I'm not going to launch another copy of the snap because, you know, I'm running it at the moment to do this. Technically I could, but I'm not going to do that because it will interfere based on my current configuration. But that is the OBS snap and all of its features. It's been a labour of love, but I think it's a great example as for the good use case of snaps, because some things we want on the absolute bleeding edge inside the snap, and some other things we want to actually hold back the versions, like the WebSocket thing. I don't always want that to build from the tip of Git. We know there's significant changes coming in version 5 of that. I want to pin that. Ffmpeg, I know if I rev to Ffmpeg 4.4, we're going to run into all sorts of compatibility problems. But then I do want the latest Pipewire, I do want the latest X264, I do want the latest version of the noise removal stuff. So that is all possible, and it's pretty fantastic to be able to do all of that. So this is going to take a little while to build, but as you can see, you know, it's going through the build. It's first of all, it'll pull all of the source, figure out all of the build orders, pull all the source in the right order, and then go through each of them and compile and build them. It's been a while since I've actually sat and watched OBS build, but I imagine it would probably take 10 minutes, something like that, on this machine to pull it all down. So this, you can see here, it's downloading that Ceph bundle. I think that's a couple of 100 meg in itself, just this Ceph runtime. So there it is. If you've not used the OBS Snap and you're interested in streaming on Linux, I do recommend you give it a try. It's, well, in my opinion, it's the best way to get access to an accelerated OBS with a whole bunch of really cool plugins that enable you to create distinctive streams. None of what I'm doing here would have been possible without this. And in fact, I started getting interested in this when my friend Alan Pope did the work to actually integrate the browser source, because browser source on Linux was missing for such a long time. So when he figured that out, we were doing 8-bit verses at the time. Well, no, we just finished doing 8-bit verses. We did a sort of a series of pilots to figure out how to do that stuff. And after we did that, he figured out how the browser source stuff worked, and that was a game changer. That now means that, like, this Wimpy's World that's scrolling in at the bottom, these, you know, social things, that's Stream Elements what do they call them? I can't remember what they call them. They don't call them plugins, but that's all done through Stream Elements, as is the chat box on the side. These are all browser sources. The way we do the multi-party game streaming, that if you go back and look at yesterday's stream after this, and you see that there's 4 of us all with cameras, voice, and game sharing, that leans heavily on the ability to use browser sources. Without that stream is simply not possible. So yeah, it's pretty good stuff. And Paul goes on to say, I used OBS to capture Scarlet Nexus footage for Jason Evangelo's Will It Linux video. It was good. So you used the OBS Snap, you saying? What Scarlet Nexus, is that a game? Yeah, okay, great, that's excellent. Yeah, so like I say, if you've got NVIDIA, then there are even some options to sort of accelerate the performance of the screen capturing as well, rather than just using traditional X shared memory. Well, I don't know about you, but my mugs of tea are empty and I'm getting thirsty again. So I hope you enjoyed that. For those of you that popped by, maybe you learned something. Maybe you learned that you want to try out the OBS Studio Snap. Now you know what's inside it. And if you're, into OBS streaming, then do on Linux, do consider joining our Discord. You'll find links in the panels below, or you can just go to wimpysworld.io/Discord. We've got quite a group of Linux streamers in there now who are mostly doing sort of let's code type stuff, but we also do game streaming as well. So like I say, last night we had a load of fun preparing for a new race season, and also some of this has rubbed off on friends of mine, Monica and Reese, who are running the community team at Ubuntu. So, some of what I learned and have put together in the Snap is what they're using to do but the Ubuntu On Air live streams now, which they multi-stream to Twitch and YouTube. So there it is, and you can see a little bit more clearly now the little spectralizer for the audio. That's just a subtle little effect. It's not meant to be too obvious. Right then, that's it. I need more tea. It's time to go. I'm thirsty. Thank you all very much for coming, and I will be doing another one of these tomorrow morning. Most mornings about this time I do these. It's asking for a password. What, for OBS? I'm not sure. I tell you what, let's do this then. Basic auth dialog pops up. Well, that's weird. Thank you for letting me know. I need to fix that. Let's do something like this then. In the meantime, let's just do that. Go here. The other place that you can do this is if you just go. Oh, maybe it'll work. Let's find out. If you just go to Wimpy's World, you should be able to join. There. Does that not work? Yeah, okay. That seems to have worked. I don't know why that is. I'll have to look into that. Graham, let me know. But for now, that's it for today. I hopefully will see you tomorrow. Thanks everyone for coming. See you soon. Bye. Have a good day.